Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I've lived on my family's land for as long as I can remember. My great-grandfather bought the property decades ago, and it's been passed down through the generations ever since. We've got 10 acres of fields, woods, and a big pond, perfect for fishing, hunting, and just enjoying nature. The privacy is one of the things I love most about it. That all changed when a new neighbor moved in down the road last fall. Right from the start, it was obvious she was one of those types who thinks the world revolves around her. How did I know? Well, for one, she introduced herself as Karen, and she lived up to the name, let me tell you. The first week she was there, I spotted her having a picnic with her friends at my pond. I walked over and nicely asked if they could move to the public lake just down the road. Karen got all huffy and said she shouldn't have to walk that far just to enjoy a picnic. I explained that the pond is on private property, but she just rolled her eyes. Her friends seemed embarrassed and agreed to leave, but Karen kept grumbling loud enough for me to hear. A few days later, I caught her taking pictures of my barn and fields to post on Instagram. When I asked her not to use my land as her personal photo shoot backdrop, she acted offended. I'm just trying to showcase the beautiful countryside. Don't you want people to appreciate the lovely scenery? She said in a snotty tone. Right, because nothing says lovely countryside like a random stranger's private farm. I told Karen in no uncertain terms that she was trespassing and needed to remove the photos immediately. She tried to argue but eventually deleted them with an exaggerated huff. Honestly, you should be thanking me, she said. Do you know how many followers I have? I'm giving your boring farm free publicity here. I just shook my head and walked away before I could say something I'd regret. This woman was unbelievable. The final straw came a few weekends later when I spotted a bunch of cars parked along my dirt road. As I got closer to the pond, I saw Karen posing in front of my barn in a fancy ball gown while her friends snapped photos. There were at least 10 people trampling all over my land without permission. I was seeing red at this point. This had gone way too far. As I marched over to confront the trespassers, I spotted my neighbor Chris walking up the road. Thank goodness, Chris is a cop, and he was home on leave that weekend. Chris, I shouted, are you seeing this? Can you help me out here? He jogged over with an angry scowl on his face. I'm off duty, but I can still make an arrest if I witness a crime. Let's do this. The sound of our voices made Karen and her crew turn around with surprised looks. Before they could react, Chris bellowed in his most authoritative cop voice. This is private property and you are all trespassing. Everyone needs to leave immediately. Karen's eyes bugged out, but she tried to keep her cool. Oh, we're just taking some pictures for my Instagram. I'm sure the owners don't mind sharing this beautiful space with my followers. Chris crossed his arms. Ma'am, I know the owners and they very much do mind. Now I suggest you pack up your little photo shoot and get off this property before you're hauled off in handcuffs. A few of Karen's friends looked uneasy and started grabbing their things. But Karen stood firm with her hands on her hips. And who are you to be making threats like that? She demanded. You have no right to disrupt my art. Do you even know who I am? Chris stepped forward and glared down at her. I'm Officer Chris Taylor with the County Police Department, and I don't care who you are or how many followers you have on social media. You are breaking the law right now by trespassing and refusing to leave when instructed. Karen faltered a bit but tried to regain her haughty composure. I'm just trying to create something beautiful to share with the world. Can't you make an exception? The more people see these photos, the better it is for this town. At this point, most of her crew looked ready to bail, but Chris blocked their path to the cars. Ma'am, you've been warned multiple times not to trespass here, he said. You're under arrest for criminal trespassing. Put your hands behind your back. Karen's mouth dropped open in shock. You can't be serious. Do you know how much time I put into getting this photo shoot just right? The lighting, my hair and makeup, it's going to be ruined. Chris was already snapping handcuffs on her wrists. You should have thought of that before you repeatedly trespassed on private property after being told not to. Now let's go. As Chris led a still protesting Karen toward his truck, her friends scrambled to grab their equipment and raced to their cars. No way were they sticking around now that the cops were involved. Meanwhile, I just stood there, grinning from ear to ear. Watching Karen finally face consequences for her entitled behavior was even more satisfying than I could have imagined. Chris waved goodbye as he drove off with a Karen pouting in the back seat. A few days later, I got a notice that Karen had pled guilty at her arraignment to avoid going to trial. She got a hefty fine and 2 years probation. I also filed a restraining order to make sure she stays far away from my property in the future. The peace and quiet has been wonderful these past few months without her around. And Chris still chuckles every time he remembers the look on Karen's face when he slapped the cuffs on her. I guess some people think that just because they're an influencer, they can do whatever they want. But Karen learned the hard way that being famous on Instagram doesn't make you above the law. Her obnoxious entitlement landed her in a jail cell with a criminal record, and I don't feel one bit sorry for her. The next one is a pro-revenge story. It was November 2009, and I was jamming to I Got a Feeling by the Black Eyed Peas, looking for a cheap apartment. I found a great ad on Craigslist and arranged for a viewing. I met the landlady, a portly shrew with a Betty Page haircut. I wasn't here for the company, I was here for the cheap room. It wasn't great looking, but it was affordable, so I told her I was interested. She informed me that the place would be mine if I could provide a deposit by the end of the day. Sweet. I rushed to the bank and grabbed the $450 needed, which was half a month's rent. She and I both signed a standard lease, and I inquired when I could get a key to move in. She said it would take a couple of days as the current tenant had yet to collect all their stuff. So for now, I slept on the couch at a buddy's place, just chilling, exploring the city during the first few weeks. A couple of days passed, and I hadn't heard from the landlady. Frustration built, and I left a few salty voicemails. But unfortunately, I was ghosted. Finally, she left me a voicemail, apologizing but stating she couldn't rent the place to me. I started to get angry, but I remained calm. I did some research, found out my rights in this unfamiliar city, and discovered that if someone backs out of a lease without a legal reason, the other party is entitled to double the deposit they placed. So, I thought, she owed me about $900? I left more messages and emails, but she continued to ghost me, not answering the phone or responding to emails. I grew fed up. At that time, I had accepted a new job, but it didn't start until the turn of the month, roughly the third week of November 2009. With spare time on my hands, I hopped on the bus, bought a magazine, and sat at the bus stop across from the rental house, waiting. And I waited. I waited for a couple of hours, but it was worth it. I saw her showing the unit to another unsuspecting renter. I held my composure and waited for her to finish with her newest renter before confronting her. As soon as she spotted me, she began to explain how the tenant had changed their mind, but I'd had enough. I squared my stance directly in front of this clearly upset charlatan. Now listen to me. You need to give me $900 as required by law by the end of the day, or I will go directly to the police station and let them deal with you. She turned pale. For a moment I thought she might vomit right there in front of me. She stammered, "Hold on, I'll get you your money." I remember thinking, well, that was easier than I thought. She went upstairs. The unit was in the basement of the house where she lived, and to my amazement, she handed me a wad of cash, saying, "Here, this is ruining my Christmas, but here." She almost knocked me off balance as she pushed the messy wad of cash into my hands. "Thank you. Good day," I said, took the money, counted it, and walked away. I didn't look back, just got on the first bus that stopped nearby, heading back in the direction of my friend's house. It wasn't until I got home that I calmed down and realized it was going to be a sweet Christmas, all thanks to a lying, phony cheapskate. But this wasn't the end of the story. About a week later, a friend called me and asked if the lady in the news was the same crazy lady from whom I got the double damage deposit. I was like, what? Sure enough, it turned out that this lady was running the same scam in parallel with a bunch of other victims. I was mortified, not just because I almost got scammed, but because it immediately occurred to me that the money I got was someone else's money, and they were homeless for the holidays. I headed straight to the police station, where, I kid you not, there was a line of crying people filing reports about being scammed by this woman. I felt awful. When it was my turn, I told my story, how I fell for it, how I left a frustrated voicemail, how I staked out the rental to confront her, my demand for double the money back, my threats of legal action against her, and finally the successful execution of the law in getting double the deposit back. I told the cop that I had taken some of the money that belonged to the other victims. She looked at me and said, "Man, you were the only one smart enough to confront her in a reasonable way. You earned that money. Don't worry about it." A young lady who was now homeless and desperate couldn't help but overhear. As I was leaving the police station, she approached me and asked, "Hey, did you get your money back from that woman?" I sheepishly replied, "Actually, I got double my deposit from her when I threatened her with the police." The girl blinked a couple of times, then grinned, started a slow clap, and announced to the other victims still waiting to give a statement in the lobby of the police station, "This guy took her for double the damage deposit." I cringed. But then, in the most unexpected turn of events, the line of victims began applauding. I suppose they realized that while their money was gone, someone had really turned the tables on her, and that made them happy. They cheered, I felt better, the cops laughed, and all of us, there had to be 20 people in all, shared a joyful cosmic moment of holiday schadenfreude at her expense. I left the police station with a clear conscience and a smile on my face, and I enjoyed every last penny of that woman's ill-gotten gain. The next one is a petty revenge story. For reference, I'm 15, and I run a small mowing company in my neighborhood. I have been saving up to buy a new mower to replace my current 16-plus-year-old one. I went into the only Home Depot in my city that had a $750 Honda mower in stock. I originally found an associate and tried to get the floor model, but since they had one in stock, I couldn't buy the floor model. Oh well, I pulled up a competitor site, Northern Tool, and showed a different associate that I could get $20 off there with a coupon, and the other store was less than 5 minutes away. They talked to who I believe was the department manager, and they approved it. So then I made my way over to the registers and told the associate what the others said, and she calls over her higher-up. Enter Karen, haircut and all. Me. I was told by that associate that I could get $20 off because a competitor has it at a better price. Karen, in a part mocking, part baby tone voice. "No, that's a coupon. It has to be the actual price of the item. They don't know what they're talking about. I'm the financial supervisor. They say on their website they accept competitors' coupons." Me. "Okay then, I'll just go put it back." So I do so and head back to the car. While leaving the store, she droops her head down, makes that puppy dog / poor you face and says, I'm sorry you could save money." I wanted to flip her off so bad. I decide, you know what? She's not a manager. Let me go talk to customer service. So I go to the desk, and this is how the conversation goes. Me. "Hey, I was trying to get $20 off a $750 mower. I was told it was okay by 2 associates, but then your supervisor over there said absolutely not." Customer service guy. "Okay, let me see this mower. I can give you $50 off." So he goes, looks at the mower, and goes back to ring me up. We have a good conversation about cars, and I walk out of the store, and Karen doesn't say a word. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Okay, so a little backstory first. I'm a 20-year-old college student full-time, doing 23-plus hours a week on top of classes to make ends meet. I live paycheck to paycheck and have a car I was paying off. I used to work at a McDonald's in my hometown, but since I moved to live on campus, which was 45 minutes away from my old job, and I wasn't willing to make the commute. So I decided to apply and got accepted to a small sandwich shop 10 minutes from my college, which was a blessing. It started out great, plenty of hours, easy work, fast days, until the old manager decided to switch stores. The new manager was one of the biggest Karens you have ever met. Like really bad, and when I say bad, I mean it. She completely changed the procedures and made things so much worse. And when I'd have to stay over, sometimes 2, 3 hours after closing, she'd burst in the next day, yelling, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Stop staying later, you have to be out by 8:30, we won't pay you for any time past then." I had no choice, because the list she gave me to do to close the store alone every night, may I add, was extremely time-consuming, especially with no help. I was expected to stop serving at 8 and do 5 people's worth of work in 30 minutes. It simply wasn't doable. Hearing I wasn't going to be paid for the time I worked, time I spent making sure everything was done on the list before I left, otherwise I'd be fired for not doing all of it, would go unpaid, as well as I'd be fired if I stayed longer than 8:30. There was no winning. On top of that, the moment management switched, they decided they were giving people too many hours, and cut me to only 3 hours a week. That went on for 4 weeks until I decided enough was enough. $45 work weeks weren't even worth putting in the time and effort to even show up. So, on one of my weekends, I was with my parents off campus, and I was due to work that day. 3 hours, of course, my only day that week. I was shopping near the said sandwich shop. It's located inside a Walmart. My mom and I were discussing for the last week how I should just quit since it seems they are trying to fire me without saying they are firing me, wanting me to leave on my own so they wouldn't need to fill out paperwork. Right then and there, I decided, you know what? Forget this job and forget my entitled Karen boss. I sent her a text that I quit on the spot and not to expect me to come in that night for my shift. She texted me back, ranting about how, since I'm not giving her a 2-week notice, I'll never be able to work at one of those sandwich shops again. At that point, I didn't care. I already had to give up my brand new car of only 4 months because I couldn't pay my loan and insurance. It was a nice car, a white shimmery 2016 Hyundai Sonata. I loved that thing. I told her at some point that week I'd try to get the brand new uniform that, funny enough, they had just given to me the week prior, a whole 3.5 months after I started working there. But I warned her my classes run till right before closing, and I didn't know when I'd be able to do so. She texted back in what I could only imagine was the snarkiest tone possible. No, I really need that uniform back tomorrow. I told her I'm sorry, but that may not be possible due to my school schedule, and I'm not willing to ditch a class to drop off a few pieces of clothing. She said, no, you will bring it back tomorrow. Don't even try to lie to me. You were seen in the store the day you quit. No excuses. Okay then. She said no excuses. I didn't want to go into an argument with her over it. And knowing she herself would be closing that day and my classes ended at 8 exactly, I happily complied. I made sure I'd arrive right as she was closing the lock on the gate. I was bringing the clothes in my reusable shopping bag. I had no throwaway bags, and since she can't take and claim my bag as her own, I was just going to give her the clothes one piece at a time. Knowing she would have to carry them out of the store, juggling them back home, made me happy. When it came time to deliver my uniform to her, all the stars seemed to align perfectly. I arrived at 8:30, caught her on the way out with the outfit not even in a reusable bag to begin with. As an extra touch of sweet, unplanned irony, it was raining outside. Hard rain. The sidewalks, I guess, were extra slippery and muddy because on my way in, I slipped and landed chest first into the mud. I was mostly spared though, because the clothes were there to break my fall and absorb most of the filth. Dropping off the muddy, loose clothes, seeing her reaction, watching her stomp her feet, wrench in disgust, holding the clothes 10 feet away from her body, huff and puff, marching out of the store in pure shock and disbelief. She didn't even have words for me. It was the sweetest revenge I had ever seen. This did mean I had to buy a whole new set of clothes and change in the Walmart bathroom, but it was all worth it to see her reaction in the end. After I'd returned to my dorm that evening, I sent her a text saying simply, enjoy, and I blocked her number. The next one is an entitled people story. This happened about 10 years ago. I was 22 at the time and had to have knee surgery to clear out shredded cartilage about a week after my birthday. This story takes place 3 days after the surgery. My mom, a nurse, important for later, my husband, boyfriend of 2 years at the time, and my best friend decided to take me shopping to try to get my mind off the surgery and to pick up craft supplies so I wouldn't be bored while off work. I should mention it was an orthopedic surgery, so I didn't need to use crutches if I didn't feel the need, and should be walking some. When we got to the craft store, not our first stop, my husband and best friend made me use one of the store's wheelchairs. I was being stubborn because I could still walk, just not very fast or as long without breaks. Since I really didn't want to be in the chair, husband and friend decided to make a game out of it, like who could push me the fastest. Now you might think we are wrong, but let me state this was in the middle of the day on a Monday, so the store was not busy, and my husband and best friend would check the aisle to make sure the coast was clear. After one of the speeding events, I was looking at something in an aisle, and my mom pulled husband and best friend away to look at something. It was something she thought I would like and was going to get it as a surprise. Well, I decided I didn't want whatever it was that I was looking at and stood up to put it back. This is when Karen appears, berating me for using the wheelchair as a toy and how there are people who actually need it. I calmly explained that I just had surgery, and that is why I'm using it. She then goes on and on about how she saw what my friends were doing and that I am obviously lying. I explained that they were trying to make me feel better. and I would tell them to push me normally from now on. This did not appease Karen, and she is still berating me. At this point, I roll up my pant leg and show her the compression bandages I am still wearing. She goes on about how that means nothing, and I could have just wrapped my knee as an excuse in case we were caught, and she bets the other people with me also have their knees wrapped. My group returns at this point and says the same thing as me. Karen is still not having it, and we are all lying. I look at my mom and ask if I can take off my bandages as they were supposed to be removed the next day. She says I really shouldn't, but she could re-wrap it for me if needed. At this point, I take off the bandages before anyone can stop me, showing Karen my knee in all its post-surgery glory. It was bruised, swollen, and crusty at the incision sites, and you can still see the iodine on my skin. Karen's face goes white and she looks like she is going to be sick. She starts stammering about how I didn't need to go that far. As my mom is rewrapping my knee, scolding me and Karen under her breath, I look at Karen and say, "What else did you want me to do? I told you, they told you, I showed you the bandages. You wouldn't get off your high horse and insisted we were lying." At this point, a staff member comes to check if we need any help, and Karen runs for the door. We had a pleasant rest of our day and stopped for ice cream on the way home. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.